Now I need to introduce Carolina. However, I've taken 2 minutes of her presentation, so we will add those to the end. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Carolina Beaini, who has given us some wonderful papers in the past. I know at the AGM, very creative and interesting ones, and this one I'm sure is going to be equally as good. Carolina holds a PhD in philosophy with a specialization in hermeneutics and critical philosophy, and she is an APPA certified practitioner. We were so glad to have her at one of the more recent trainings. She is also certified in mediation, negotiation, organizational consulting, and leadership. My goodness, that's a lot of certifications. She is a founder of PHICLARITY, a method for developing philosophical intelligence, which, as I understand it, results in a harmony of cognitive, emotional, social, and ethical dimensions through philosophical reflection. Her presentation today will explain her methodology, which he calls PHICLARITY, and FHERE, a documentation framework she has developed, which is designed to trace and document the progressive development of philosophical intelligence. And I'm really looking forward to the FHERE in particular. So without more ado, Carolina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vogona. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you today, and especially after Tatiana's presentation, because I think we should be communicating together, Tatiana. There is something that can answer what you present here, and I'm so happy to hear clinical philosophy in Canada with me. So it's so amazing to know about it. So I'm the host, Lou. Can I share my screen?
You are co-host. You may please share your screen.
Okay. Certainly, it is a pleasure to share with you a framework that has emerged from years of research, philosophical practice, consulting, and my work in hermeneutics and clinical philosophy. Today, I will introduce three interconnected dimensions of what I call the PHICLARITY model of applied philosophical practice. The Phi intelligence, that is a concept. We will see it in the next slides. The PHICLARITY method and FHERE, the evolution of philosophical intelligence record. And together, the three dimensions from a model form a model for cultivating philosophical clarity, ethical awareness, and thoughtful actions. So let's begin with the question that inspired this work. So, what kind of intelligence allows us to examine our assumptions, clarify our values, and certainly after that, to orient and think how to make our decisions in complex situations. So, through years of consultations and observation, these questions continue to return. It's not simply about how do we think, but rather how do we think well? So, how do we bring coherence to thought, values, judgment, and action? The framework I present today emerged from the search for an answer to that question. And to understand why this question matters, let us consider the context in which it arose. So, today's professional environments invest considerable effort in developing competencies such as leadership, coaching, negotiation, emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, ethical decision making. These developments are both valuable and important and may be necessary. Yet many people continue to struggle with conceptual confusion, fragmented judgment, ethical tension, and uncertainty when facing complexity. In other words, we often develop competencies without equally cultivating the reflective capacity needed to use them coherently. This led me to a central question. We train competencies, but do we also cultivate the intelligence that enables us to reflect upon them? That question became the starting point for the concept of philosophical intelligence. So, why philosophy? If the challenge is not simply a lack of skills, but a lack of reflective coherence, then another question naturally follows. What does philosophy contribute? So, philosophical practice cultivates the ability to clarify concepts, examine assumptions, navigate ambiguity, orient ethical judgment, and reflect before acting. These capacities have accompanied philosophy since its origins and remain profoundly relevant today. Perhaps philosophy offers more than theories and answers. Perhaps it cultivates a distinctive way of engaging with complexity, a way of thinking that brings coherence to understanding, judgment, and action. This is the idea that led me to propose the concept of philosophical intelligence. And here, if you want to stop a little bit, just to dig inside, what is philosophical intelligence? So I define philosophical intelligence, phi intelligence, and the abbreviation phi I, as a reflective capacity understood as a sigma of multiple forms of intelligence. Here, sigma does not refer to a simple sum. Rather, it represents a process of harmonization. Phi intelligence creates a reflective space in which cognitive, emotional, social, moral, and creative intelligences can enter into dialogue. Instead of operating independently, these dimensions become aligned through philosophical inquiry. This is why I describe phi intelligence as a reflective center through which multiple forms of intelligence can be examined, aligned, and directed. In other words, philosophy becomes a space where intelligence become coherent. Let's move to Wi-Fi. So before moving forward, I would like just to briefly explain why I chose the term phi. First, it stands for philosophical intelligence as philosophical. At the same time, the Greek letter phi has long been associated with harmony, proportion, and coherence. I do not use phi here in its mathematical sense. Rather, I use it symbolically. Just as phi evokes balance and harmony, phi intelligence seeks to bring coherence to the different dimensions of a human intelligence. Rather than representing another category of intelligence, phi symbolizes philosophy's capacity to orient, connect, and harmonize the many ways in which we think, feel, judge, and act. This idea becomes even clearer in the conceptual model that follows. So, this figure illustrates the central proposition of the framework. Phi intelligence is understood as a sigma of multiple forms of intelligence, but sigma should not be understood as addition. It represents integration. In each form of intelligence contributes something essential, yet in complex situations, they do not always point in the same direction. This is precisely where philosophical reflection becomes indispensable. It provides a space in which these dimensions can be examined, connected, and brought into coherence. For this reason, I propose that philosophical intelligence that does not replace other forms of intelligence. It enables their reflective integration. Rather than adding intelligence together, phi intelligence gives them coherence, direction, and meaning. This naturally leads us to the next question. What does this integration actually look like? So, if the previous figure introduced the concept of phi intelligence, this one illustrates its architecture. At the center of the model lies phi intelligence. Around it are the dimensions that shape human understanding: cognitive, emotional, social, moral, creative, and more. The purpose of phi intelligence is neither to replace nor to dominate these capacities. Its role is to create a reflective space where they can enter into dialogue. In complex situations, these dimensions often pull us in different directions. Philosophical inquiry helps us examine their relationships, navigate their tensions, and seek greater coherence among them. Rather than representing another form of intelligence, phi intelligence functions as the reflective center that gives direction and coherence to them all. This naturally raises another question. Can this integrative capacity itself be cultivated and developed? So, one of the central propositions of this framework is that philosophical intelligence is developmental. It proposes five interconnected stages through which philosophical intelligence matures. It unfolds progressively through lived experience and philosophical inquiry. It progresses from philosophical awareness, conceptual clarification, then toward reflective integration, philosophical insight, and ultimately transformative wisdom. These stages are not rigid category. Rather, they describe a developmental movement through which reflection becomes increasingly integrated, discerning, and transformative. Instead of asking, "What stage am I in?" the more meaningful question becomes, "How is my philosophical understanding evolving?" So the journey begins with early stages, with philosophical awareness. At the stage one, individuals sense that a situation contains a deeper tension. They may not yet have the language to describe it, but they recognize that reflection is needed. Questions naturally emerge. What does this feel? Why does this feel unjust? Why am I uncomfortable with this decision? And the stage two is conceptual clarification. So the reflection becomes more intentional. People begin to clarify concept, identify assumptions, distinguish between competing interpretations. They move from an intuitive discomfort to an articulated philosophical question. As this slide suggests, reflection begins when confusion becomes visible. Now we're seeing the advanced stages that are here that represent the deeper maturation of philosophical intelligence. At reflective integration, different dimensions of experience begin to work together. Reason, emotion, relationships, and ethical considerations are no longer examined separately, but as part of a coherent whole. At philosophical insight, reflection gives rise to a deeper understanding. Individuals develop a greater discernment and a clearer ethical orientation. The focus shifts from simply understanding a situation to understanding it differently. Finally, transformative wisdom represents a more enduring transformation. So, philosophy becomes more than a method for addressing dilemmas. It gradually becomes a way of engaging with oneself, with others, and with the world. In my own philosophical consultation, I have often observed that people initially seek clarity about a situation. What they eventually discover is that the deepest transformation concerns themselves. This progression from awareness to wisdom forms the developmental foundation of the PHICLARITY framework. So, if philosophical intelligence can be cultivated, the next question naturally follows. How does that development occur? A concept alone is not enough. Development requires a practice. It requires a process capable of guiding inquiry through complexity. And the response I can propose here is the PHICLARITY method. The PHICLARITY method constitutes the methodological dimension of the framework. It provides a structured approach to philosophical inquiry designed to cultivate philosophical intelligence in practice. The method unfolds through four broad movements. It begins with conceptual clarification, where we seek greater precision in language and meaning. It then moves to reflective discernment, examining competing interpretation and assumptions. Next comes ethical orientation, where reflection engages values, responsibilities, and consequences. And finally, it culminates in thoughtful action. The objective is not reflection for its own sake. It is reflection that informs meaningful, responsible, and grounded action. In this way, philosophical inquiry becomes an intentional practice rather than a purely theoretical exercise. The four movements are those four movements are expressed in greater detail through the PHICLARITY acronym. Each letter represents, as you see, a stage of the inquiry process, while also drawing inspiration for a major philosophical tradition. It's not limited only for those traditions. It's really open because each key is related to many schools of philosophy. The process begins by clarifying the problem, uncovering hidden assumptions, and engaging in interpretive inquiry. It then advances through conceptual analysis, logical examination, and ethical assessment. Finally, reflection opens toward insights, implementation, transformation, and integration. What matters is not each individual step in isolation, but the progression they create together. The PHICLARITY method does not belong to a single philosophical school. Rather, it offers a structured synthesis of complementary traditions, from Socratic dialogue and Aristotelian logic to hermeneutics, ethics, pragmatism, and philosophy as a way of life. This synthesis prepares the ground for the final dimension of the framework, a way of documenting how philosophical inquiry itself evolves over time. So the PHICLARITY method should not be understood as a linear checklist. Rather, it is a living process of philosophical inquiry. Every inquiry begins with a live situation, a question, a dilemma, or an experience that calls for deeper understanding. From there, the process moves through clarification, conceptual analysis, examination of assumption, as we said, and ethical discernment. These stages gradually give rise to insight and ultimately to thoughtful action, but action is not the end of the process. Every decision becomes the starting point for a new cycle of inquiry. New experiences generate new questions. New questions invite new understanding. And for this reason, I see philosophical inquiry not as a sequence with a fixed end point, but as an ongoing developmental movement. Reflection does not conclude inquiry, it renews it. This continuous movement naturally leads to the third dimension that I mentioned before in this framework. And we're talking now about a fear. So the third dimension of the framework is a fear, the evolution of philosophical intelligence record. A fear emerged from a simple observation. Many developmental models assess competencies, behaviors, and personality traits. Very few attempt to document, not measure, document the evolution of philosophical inquiry itself. During philosophical consultation, I became increasingly interested not only in the client's question, but in the evolution of the person asking this question. This observation becomes the foundation of a fear. Rather than measuring what someone knows, a fear seeks to accompany how one's understanding develops. It documents significant questions, philosophical exploration, emerging insights, decision, and the evolution of understanding across lived experience. Unlike static personality typologies, a fear is designed to document the progressive evolution of philosophical intelligence across reflective experience and time. Rather than recording a profile, a fear records a journey. So, if philosophical intelligence develops, how can that development become visible? The figure proposes here one possible answer. It illustrates the progression from philosophical awareness through conceptual clarification toward reflective integration, philosophical insight, and finally the transformative wisdom. A fear does not simply document isolated reflection. It traces the developmental trajectory of philosophical understanding itself. The essential question, therefore, changes. Instead of asking, what decision did I make? We begin asking, how has my way of understanding evolved? That shift captures the true purpose of a fear. The second model here presents development from a longitudinal perspective. The horizontal axis represents experience unfolding through time. The vertical axis represents increasing philosophical integration. So each point may correspond to a dilemma, a consultation, significant decision, or a moment of philosophical inquiry. Individually, these moments are meaningful. Collectively, they reveal something even more important, a developmental trajectory. Over time, understanding becomes more integrated, judgment becomes more coherent, action becomes more thoughtful. A fear, therefore, visualizes philosophical development not as a fixed achievement, but as an evolving practice. Philosophical intelligence is not something we possess, it is something we continuously cultivate. So, if the previous figure illustrated development across time, this one focuses on how that development occurs. Philosophical intelligence emerges through the progressive integration of different dimensions of a human intelligence. The process often begins with reasoning, conceptual understanding. As inquiry deepens, emotional awareness becomes part of the reflective process. Gradually, social understanding, ethical discernment, and creative imagination also become integrated in a way and being capable of seeing more interpretations. The goal is not to accumulate more forms of intelligence, as I said. Rather, it is to bring them into reflective dialogue. From this perspective, phi intelligence represents a movement from fragmentation toward coherence. The aim is therefore not to become more intelligent in one particular domain, but to become more coherent in the way multiple forms of intelligence inform one another. This figure combines the two previous perspectives. Figure 1 illustrated how integration occurs. Figure 2 illustrates how that integration matures over time. As philosophical inquiry deepens, the range of considerations brought into reflection gradually expands. What begins as cognitive analysis progressively incorporates emotional, social, ethical, and creative dimensions. This growing integration enables increasingly nuanced judgment in complex situations. This is precisely what a fear seeks to accompany, not simply whether reflection has taken place, but how its quality and depth evolve throughout life experience. The question is no longer whether philosophical inquiry occurs. The question becomes, how does it transform the person who practices it? This brings us to the philosophical foundation that underlies the entire framework. So we have now explored the three dimensions of the framework. As you saw, phi intelligence, the phi clarity method, and a fear. A deeper question, however, still remains: what philosophical movement connects these three dimensions? For me, the answer emerged through the hermeneutic tradition, and particularly in my work through the work of Paul Ricoeur. So, my researches in hermeneutics and clinical philosophy led me to explore how philosophical reflection contributes not only to understanding situation but also to transforming the person who interprets them. The Phi Clarity framework represents a meeting point between the research and recurs understanding in hermeneutics, the understanding of reflections, interpretation, and self understanding. Within this perspective, philosophical development may be understood as a movement from understanding to reflection to interpretation and ultimately to transformation. Understanding opens inquiry, reflection deepens it, interpretation gives it meaning, and the transformation occurs when understanding becomes integrated into one's way of thinking, acting, and living. And as Ricoeur reminds us, reflection is the appropriation of our effort to exist. So this idea captured the spirit of the entire Phi Clarity framework. Ultimately, philosophical development is not simply the acquisition of knowledge, it is a continuous process of becoming. And this final figure brings together the complete architecture of the Phi Clarity model of applied philosophical practice. The model integrates three complementary dimensions. At its center lies Phi intelligence, the philosophical capacity that brings coherence to multiple forms of intelligence. The first supporting dimensions is the Phi Clarity method, which provides the structured pathway through which this capacity is cultivated. The second supporting dimension is a fear, which documents how philosophical understanding develops across experience and time. Together, three dimensions unite: a concept, a method, and a developmental framework. Or more simply, let's say, Phi intelligence provides the capacity, Phi clarity provides the process, and a fear provides the developmental record. Taken together, they form an integrated model for cultivating philosophical clarity, ethical discernment, and thoughtful actions. And I would like to conclude by returning to a question. What would it mean for our professional and personal lives if we consciously cultivated philosophical intelligence? Today, I have suggested that applied philosophical practice may offer something more than responses to individual questions. It may cultivate a way of engaging with complexity, a way of clarifying concepts, examining assumptions, integrating multiple forms of intelligence, navigating ethical uncertainty, and acting with greater coherence. The PHICLARITY model represents one of many possibilities, contributions to that work, not as a finished theory, but as an invitation to inquire more deeply, to understand before judging, to transform reflection into thoughtful action, and perhaps above all, to recognize philosophy as a lifelong practice of human development. Perhaps the future of applied philosophical practice is not simply to help people answer philosophical questions, but to cultivate the philosophical intelligence through which they learn to ask, to understand, and to live those questions more wisely. Because in the end, as I said, philosophical intelligence is not something we possess, it is something we cultivate. And thank you so much.
Thank you for an absolutely wonderful paper, Carolina. Um, I'd like to just ask one question before I open it up to the floor. Um,
Yeah.
I have some, I think I understand what the counselor would be doing in cultivating emotional intelligence for the first three stages. It's, I would think of it almost as like encouraging a kind of reflective equilibrium, to use a Rawlsian term there. But I don't quite understand what the philosopher, the counselor's role is in the transformative stage. How do you encourage that?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Vogona. In fact, you're asking something I would like really to clarify here. And this point typically puts me in face of what Brenifier did and maybe continue to do until now. When I met Brenifier the first time and I continue to work on what he did, his philosophy, I noticed that he didn't and he doesn't make a certain kind of maintenance. So when someone comes to him, so it's like a cut, okay? We trigger what we name philosophical inquiry and question, and then the person will be choosing if he will be coming back, asking more or not. So this point trigger many question in my own way of thinking, and I made sure from the first consultation I had just to track how people that come to my clinic evolve with time. So if I'm meeting them for, let's say, 2, 3, 4 consultation or more or less, I want to make sure, for me, it was for me, only for me at first. I want to make sure what does it mean to come to a philosophical clinic? What's the difference between the philosophical clinic and the psychological clinic? So that's why I started to track first on a paper with a pen and paper, and then documenting it through all the sessions. And what I noticed that really people can have a very big transformation in their life. And I noticed that this kind of transformation, we are, as counselor, the stimulator of this transformation. So if you're asking me now how we can do it, it's just about having this track, sorry, that I named a fear, to just document and point out when the evolution is made to the person in front of you. Why I want to document it and why I want to say it loudly for him. Because it can help, uh, it can help garder, it can help fortify his self-esteem. That was Tatiana's was saying about. It can help him recatch the self-esteem, and it can help him see the power of this development track when coming to philosophical counselor, to philosophical clinic. So it is natural act that we do always through our questions, but the only difference now is to just have it as documented as a proof for me as counselor and for the person that you evolve with time. It's not about just being in the clinic and paying for the consultation and then you go home and nothing changed. Many things change, and that's what my counselees always said. You're making a huge transformation. Or after 2 years, I can see someone that could say, "You transformed my life." How I transformed your life? So it's not about me transforming your life. It's about channeling your transformation through all the situation that happens with you in life. So I don't know if it is clear or not. It can need another paper, I think, or two more papers just to qualify all the points that were mentioned here, because really it is too deep and it was so hard for me just to join everything in 23 slide, and in the 23rd it was like frustrating for me because there is too many things to share with you and it's not the right moment for 30 minutes, huh?
Well, thank you very much for your answer. Other questions? Yes, Patricia?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I
Yes.
can.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Carolina. Really, congratulations. I mean, your model and your framework and all the work you put inside. I mean, it's a huge work, even trying to represent the process. It's really, so congratulations. I mean,
Thank you.
and you're going to work on that. And I'm just reflecting about are you going to introduce quantitative measurement? Because it is a framework, it is a model, it is a method. So we can also speak about the need of a method. We need a method or not? Because I think that all of us during our philosophical practice, we help people to pass from feelings to thought to actions. How to control, how not to be run by our feelings, emotions, and to exercise our thinking, our way of thinking, in order to act the truth or act well or ethically or morally. So this is our process. So you built up this definition and method, and even I found really interesting even the correspondence between the initial letter and the concept and the quotation from philosophical. So really it's a big, huge model, but it could be very useful if it became introduced in a methodology like a quantitative research, which we lack as philosophers, because we generally we make research on a qualitative basis, but we lack on quantitative methods to measure it. So given that you made this effort, put another step and add a kind of measurement, because this could be useful in a kind of academic context in order to make a research. And another question, are you going to propose or to market this idea? Because I saw you patented the PHICLARITY. So you put so probably you're going to develop the method that you propose to companies, to managers, to schools, or just a question, just in order to understand, because it's so organized and so well designed, from the logo to the lecture. So it's really kind of fascinating work.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia, for the question. In fact, I'm waiting more than a direction in the questions, because I know there is more than one thing that should be really elaborated carefully. So for the first part of the question about the quantitative measurement.
Evaluation or measurement, yeah.
Yeah, let me tell you one thing. It's so delicate because when we're in the philosophical context, it's not about measuring and putting people in categories. I'm against because I don't want to put like a style of you have like a general anxiety disorder questionnaire. It's not about that. If there is a quantitative part in this work, it will be for me to document the time everyone takes to make this transformation. So it will be just to prove, to have data for the next generation in philosophical practice and saying with more than 2,000 people in, I don't know, 10 years, most of them took 10 sessions to see this transformation and to have it maintained in their life. And this is the whole part here, to have it maintained. Because as Tatiana said, sometimes you see people, they discuss a question they have in philosophical inquiry, and then they leave. And then after
Yes.
some time, they come again. And they said, I cannot. That is they name it, I'm in a down, there is downs and ups. I'm looking for the maintaining, for the maintenance and maintaining of this transformation. This is the quantitative parts. It's for me to guide the next work after what I want to do or what I'm doing, to have like a kind of keys. Okay, and the second part, I don't know, clear
Yes.
for you? Yeah,
Yes.
until now. And
On
the,
this
the
basis.
second part, the second part of your question, in fact, PHICLARITY is my company. I founded the PHICLARITY in Canada as a Canadian company, and I'm dealing with all kind of consultation, ethical, philosophical consultation, and whatever. So through PHICLARITY and all the work I do in, I prefer to name this model PHICLARITY model because it is like parallel to what I'm working and how I'm thinking. And the initial idea that stimulates this kind of thinking was what I read in also Platon et non Prozac pour Lumarinov, the peace acronym that he mentioned before. And it was like, I don't know, 7 years ago. Now I felt with PHICLARITY, and I chose PHICLARITY as name just because I want it. It is the PHICLARITY. Okay, it is the phi and clarity. So that's why I made sure to have this kind of progression in the whole framework that I presented. And the lovely part in it that when I'm talking about philosophical intelligence, really it's about observation. So the person that visits you, Patricia, the first time is not the same person that leave your clinic after six consultations. So it's about this kind of integrating more than one kind of intelligence together. And then we have the chance to arrive to a kind of fully integrated intelligence. I named here ethical, social, creative. The creative is repaired, for example, for the perspective. When a person in front of you starts to see, oh, it's right. There is more than one interpretation. It is a creative part. It's a work in his faculties inside his mind. So yes, this model I prepared. It is ready to be presented to organizations, and I quietly begin to present it in small groups in like training from oh,
I'm
many language. So it's a kind ready, and I presented to groups in ethical training, and it's a model,
Mm,
but it can be
yeah.
used in different situations. It's not only just to be presented at the whole, it is like more than point. Thank you.
I, I see we're out of time, but I'd like to fit in one more question for somebody who hasn't asked any questions. And Caroline, I would love to see a paper on your organizational work with PHICLARITY. Karen, very quickly, one more question.
Okay, this is a little question for the kind of the basis of everything in a certain way. There seems to be an assumption that like philosophy is process. And maybe for many people it is, maybe many people think of it as a process. I'd like to suggest perhaps ideally it's not really a process, but that's based on the very word philosophy, love of wisdom. And as an analogy, I'd like to think of lawyers and why people go to law school. And I bet you there's lots and lots of lawyers that go to law school because they want to argue. They find they're good at arguing. And yet I think the ideal lawyer, if you really think about it idealistically, is somebody that desires justice. And philosophers love to argue oftentimes, just like lawyers do. But I wonder if there could be a little different beginning with a love, a desire of wisdom at the very beginning, rather than oh, I notice there's a conflict. I wonder if you have anything to say to that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the question. In fact, let me tell you, all those elements in this presentation were taken from a deep observation in a daily based practice. So it's rarely to see someone that enters your office, your clinic, asking, I would like to discuss about what's after the death, for example. There is a question like that, but initially it's rare to see someone. I'm talking about myself, an experience of 13 years. It's normally starts because they are in confusion between psychological work and philosophical work. And because they visited psychological clinic and they are not satisfied, the problem in place, stays in place, they try to visit philosophical clinic. And here all the difference starts. And here we can start to see this kind of transformation. So no one, I don't want to say no one, most of the people don't are
Don't,
not conscious about their being. We are philosopher. Okay,
I'm
we
afraid we're
can. Yeah, it's not for me. It was like a huge experience, and honestly, I know I'm saying huge. It is a huge experience in this question. Typically, everyone go in for a conflict, for a family problem, for a personal problem, for unsatisfaction for feeling like I cannot breathe, doctor. How can I know what's wrong with me? I saw doctor, I saw psychological therapist, I saw psychoanalysis, and then I'm here. I don't know if it will work, but I'm here. And yes, it
all
works.
right. With that, we'll have to stop. We are
Okay.
here, and thank you very